Officer Richardson stood in line at the local coffee shop, his police badge gleaming under the warm morning light. The small town's beloved cafe was bustling with its usual morning crowd, but something felt different today. Maybe it was the autumn breeze that carried whispers of change, or perhaps it was the unfamiliar face that had just walked through the door. A well-dressed woman in her mid-40s entered the cafe, her professional demeanor catching several patrons' attention. Her dark blazer and confident stride spoke of authority, but Officer Richardson barely gave her a second glance as she took her place in line behind him. The morning had already put him in a foul mood. A domestic disturbance call had stretched his overnight shift, and the paperwork had kept him at the precinct well past dawn. All he wanted now was his extra-strong coffee before heading home. "Excuse me," the woman said politely, tapping his shoulder. "I believe you dropped this." She held out a small notebook that had slipped from his back pocket. Officer Richardson turned around, his face twisted with unexplained irritation. "Don't touch my things," he snapped, snatching the notebook from her hand. The woman's eyes widened slightly, but she maintained her composure. The barista called out his order, and Officer Richardson grabbed his steaming cup of coffee. As he turned to leave, his shoulder knocked against the woman's arm, causing him to spill some of his drink. Instead of apologizing, he muttered under his breath, "People need to learn to keep their distance." The woman's voice cut through the morning chatter. "Officer, I believe we need to have a conversation about professional conduct." Richardson stopped in his tracks, his face reddening with anger. "Listen, lady, I don't know who you think you are, but I'm Assistant Chief Thompson," she stated calmly, pulling out her credentials. "And as of next week, I'll be taking over as your new police chief." The cafe fell silent. Several customers pulled out their phones, anticipating what might happen next. Officer Richardson's face drained of color as he realized the gravity of his mistake. Assistant Chief Thompson spoke quietly but firmly. "I've been in town for the past week, observing our officers in their natural interactions with the public. I believe we need to discuss your approach to community relations." Richardson's coffee cup trembled slightly in his hand. His mind raced back to all his recent interactions, the unnecessary traffic stops, the harsh words with teenagers at the park, the complaints he'd dismissed. He'd gotten comfortable, too comfortable, with throwing his weight around in this small town. "Ma'am, I apologize. I didn't." "Save it for our meeting," she interrupted. "My office, 2 p.m. today. We'll discuss this incident and review your service record." Her voice softened slightly. "Officer Richardson, our job is to serve and protect all members of this community." The woman's voice cut through the morning chatter. "Officer, I believe we need to have a conversation about professional conduct." Richardson stopped in his tracks, his face reddening with anger. "Listen, lady, I don't know who you think you are, but I'm Assistant Chief Thompson," she stated calmly, pulling out her credentials. "And as of next week, I'll be taking over as your new police chief." The cafe fell silent. Several customers pulled out their phones, anticipating what might happen next. Officer Richardson's face drained of color as he realized the gravity of his mistake. Assistant Chief Thompson spoke quietly but firmly. "I've been in town for the past week, observing our officers in their natural interactions with the public. I believe we need to discuss your approach to community relations." Richardson's coffee cup trembled slightly in his hand. His mind raced back to all his recent interactions, the unnecessary traffic stops, the harsh words with teenagers at the park, the complaints he'd dismissed. He'd gotten comfortable, too comfortable, with throwing his weight around in this small town. "Ma'am, I apologize. I didn't." "Save it for our meeting," she interrupted. "My office, 2 p.m. today. We'll discuss this incident and review your service record." Her voice softened slightly. "Officer Richardson, our job is to serve and protect all members of this community. Every interaction matters. The other customers watched as Richardson nodded stiffly and hurried out of the cafe, leaving his half-spilled coffee on the counter. Assistant Chief Thompson ordered her drink, a simple green tea, and smiled warmly at the barista who had witnessed everything. Word of the incident spread through the small town like wildfire. By noon, the local Facebook community group was buzzing with accounts from witnesses. Some shared their own stories of encounters with Officer Richardson, while others expressed hope for positive changes under the new chief's leadership. Back at the station, Richardson sat in his patrol car, his hands gripping the steering wheel. 15 years on the force, and he'd never felt more ashamed. The face in his rearview mirror looked older somehow, worn down not by years but by the weight of his actions. His phone buzzed with a message from his daughter. "Dad, is everything okay? People are talking about what happened at the cafe." His throat tightened. He'd always told her to stand up against bullying, to treat everyone with respect. What example had he been setting? As the afternoon approached, Richardson found himself outside the chief's office. Through the glass, he could see Assistant Chief Thompson reviewing his files. The stack of civilian complaints he'd accumulated over the years sat on her desk like a monument to his failures. A young rookie officer passed by, offering a sympathetic nod. Richardson remembered being that young once, full of ideals about protecting and serving. Somewhere along the way, he'd lost sight of those values, allowing bitterness and prejudice to color his interactions. The department secretary called out, "Officer Richardson, Chief Thompson will see you now." As he reached for the door handle, Richardson caught his reflection in the glass. The man staring back at him wasn't the officer he'd promised to be when he first pinned on his badge. The coffee shop incident hadn't just been about one bad morning, it was a wake-up call, a mirror showing him what he'd become. Inside the office, Chief Thompson gestured to the chair across from her desk. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the room, and Richardson couldn't help but feel that his career was casting similar shadows, dark spots that needed to be brought into the light and addressed. "Officer Richardson," she began, her voice carrying the same calm authority it had in the cafe, "let's talk about the kind of police force this community deserves, and how we can work together to make that happen." Richardson straightened in his chair, ready to face whatever consequences awaited him. Sometimes, he realized, the biggest acts of service come not from wielding authority, but from acknowledging our mistakes and committing to change. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking the beginning of what would become a turning point, not just for Officer Richardson, but for the entire department. The story of the coffee shop confrontation would be remembered not as a scandal, but as the day real change began in their small town's police force. As Chief Thompson opened his file, Richardson took a deep breath. The afternoon sun continued to stream through the windows, illuminating the path forward, a path that would require humility, growth, and a renewed commitment to the oath he'd taken all those years ago. This was just the beginning of a much larger story about accountability, change, and the courage to face our own prejudices. For Officer Richardson and the department, the real work was about to begin. The meeting with Chief Thompson lasted 3 hours. By the time Officer Richardson emerged from her office, the sun had begun its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. His fellow officers glanced at him curiously as he walked through the precinct, but no one dared to ask about the outcome. Chief Thompson hadn't fired him. Instead, she'd done something that felt almost worse. She'd made him confront every complaint, every incident, every moment where he'd fallen short of his duty. The stack of files on her desk told a story he couldn't ignore anymore. "You have 2 choices," she had told him, her voice firm but not unkind. "You can resign, or you can commit to a complete overhaul of your approach to police work. That means additional training, community service, and regular evaluations. The choice is yours." As Richardson drove home that evening, her words echoed in his mind. The streets he patrolled daily looked different somehow. He passed the local community center where teenagers hung out after school, kids he'd often viewed with suspicion rather than understanding. Outside the grocery store, he saw Mrs. Chen closing her small shop, the elderly shopkeeper who'd filed a complaint about his aggressive response to a simple shoplifting call. His phone buzzed again. This time it was his wife. "We need to talk when you get home." The modest house he pulled up to had been his home for 12 years. Through the window, he could see his daughter doing homework at the kitchen table. His wife stood at the sink, her back turned to the door. The scene struck him with an unexpected wave of emotion. This was what he had to lose. "I saw the video," his wife said as soon as he walked in. Someone had posted footage of the coffee shop incident online, and it had gone viral in their small community. "What were you thinking?" His daughter looked up from her textbooks, her eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and disappointment. At 16, she was old enough to understand exactly what had happened. "Dad, my friends are asking me about it. They're saying..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Richardson sank into a kitchen chair, his uniform suddenly feeling too tight, too heavy. "Chief Thompson gave me a choice," he began, his voice hoarse. "I can quit, or I can change." His wife turned from the sink, drying her hands on a dish towel. "And? I'm staying," he said quietly. "I'm going to do the work." The next morning, Richardson arrived at the station an hour early. Chief Thompson had left a detailed improvement plan on his desk. The first item on the list, 2 weeks of intensive diversity and de-escalation training, starting immediately. The training center was in the neighboring city, a 45-minute drive away. As Richardson walked into the classroom, he felt like a rookie again. The instructor, a retired police captain named Rodriguez, had a reputation for transforming problem officers. "Welcome to your wake-up call," Rodriguez announced to the small group. "You're here because something went wrong. The question is, are you ready to figure out what that something is?" Throughout the day, they reviewed body camera footage of controversial police interactions, analyzed their own implicit biases, and practiced de-escalation techniques. During one role-playing exercise, Richardson had to play the civilian while another officer acted as law enforcement. The experience shook him. For the first time, he felt the anxiety, the fear, the helplessness that came with being on the other side of authority. When an officer approached with aggression, the way he had so many times, his heart actually raced. During lunch break, he called his wife. "I get it now," he said simply. "I finally get it." Back at the station, Chief Thompson's changes were already taking effect. She'd implemented a new community outreach program, requiring officers to spend time each week in neighborhood meetings, local schools, and community events. The goal wasn't just to police the community, but to become part of it. Richardson's first assignment was to visit the very coffee shop where the incident had occurred. This time, he wasn't there for coffee, he was there to apologize to the staff and regular customers who had witnessed his behavior. The barista from that morning, a college student named Patel, seemed surprised by his return. "Officer Richardson? Can I help you?" "Actually," he said, removing his cap, "I'm here to help you. I want to apologize for my behavior the other day, and I'm hoping you'll let me make it right." The cafe fell quiet again, but this time for a different reason. Richardson shared his story honestly, about the wake-up call, about the training, about his commitment to change. Then he asked if he could work a shift alongside the staff, learning what it was like to serve the community in a different way. Patel smiled cautiously. "We could use help during the morning rush tomorrow. But no spilling coffee this time, okay?" The next morning, Richardson arrived at the cafe in civilian clothes. For 4 hours, he learned to make lattes, handle customer complaints, and work as part of a team that didn't wear badges. Every customer who recognized him from the incident saw something different, an officer willing to humble himself and learn. During his break, he checked his phone to find a message from Chief Thompson. "Progress isn't just about policies and procedures. It's about changing hearts and minds, starting with our own. Keep going. As Richardson put his phone away and returned to the counter, he caught his reflection in the coffee machine's polished surface. The face looking back at him was different from the one he'd seen in the chief's office window. There was something new there, something that looked a lot like hope. The story of the racist cop and the coffee shop incident was evolving into something unexpected, a story of transformation, of facing hard truths, and of the possibility of real change. For Richardson, each cup of coffee served was another step toward redemption, another chance to prove that people could learn, grow, and become better than their worst moments. As the morning rush wound down, Patel handed him a cup of coffee, the same order he'd spilled that fateful day. "On the house," she said with a genuine smile. "Because everyone deserves a second chance to get it right." Word of Officer Richardson's shift at the coffee shop spread quickly through the community. Some praised it as a genuine step toward change, while others remained skeptical. But for Richardson, each passing day brought new revelations about his role as a police officer and his place in the community. Chief Thompson's improvement plan entered its second phase. This time, Richardson found himself assigned to the youth center in the predominantly minority neighborhood he'd previously patrolled with what he now recognized as unwarranted suspicion. The center's director, an energetic woman everyone called Coach P, didn't mince words during their first meeting. "Our kids have had enough negative experiences with law enforcement. If you're here to make a difference, prove it through actions, not words." Richardson's assignment was to help coordinate an after-school basketball program. The irony wasn't lost on him. Just months ago, he'd been breaking up basketball games, viewing every group of young people as potential trouble. His first day at the center was eye-opening. Teenagers who normally crossed the street to avoid him now watched his every move with a mixture of curiosity and distrust. A group of boys playing basketball stopped their game when he walked in, the ball bouncing away in sudden silence. "I'm not here as a police officer today," Richardson announced, removing his jacket to reveal a plain t-shirt. "I'm here to learn from you guys. Maybe you could teach me a thing or two about basketball." One of the boys, a tall teenager wearing a worn Golden State Warriors jersey, picked up the ball. "For real? You want to play?" "If you'll have me," Richardson replied, trying to keep his voice casual despite his racing heart. The boy studied him for a moment before cracking a slight smile. "Hope you can keep up, officer." That first game was humbling. Richardson, who'd prided himself on his physical fitness, found himself thoroughly outplayed by teenagers half his age. But something unexpected happened between the missed shots and the breathless attempts to defend. Barriers began to break down. During a water break, the boy in the Warriors jersey introduced himself as DJ. "You're not as bad as they say," he said, passing Richardson a water bottle. "But your jump shot needs serious work." Richardson laughed, genuinely this time. "Maybe you could help me with that?" As the weeks passed, Richardson became a regular fixture at the youth center. He learned their names, their stories, their dreams, and their fears. DJ, he discovered, was raising his younger siblings while his mother worked 2 jobs. Another boy, whose grandmother had filed a complaint against Richardson last year, turned out to be a brilliant math student dreaming of engineering school. Chief Thompson stopped by one afternoon to observe. She found Richardson on the court, demonstrating defensive stance to a group of younger kids. The same officer who'd once radiated hostility was now high-fiving elementary schoolers and offering patient encouragement. "This isn't just about checking boxes anymore, is it?" she asked him afterward. Richardson wiped sweat from his forehead, watching as the kids continued their practice. "No, ma'am. It's about seeing what I was blind to before." The transformation wasn't just happening at the youth center. During his regular patrols, Richardson began approaching situations differently. When he encountered teenagers playing music too loudly in the park, instead of immediately confronting them, he engaged in conversation. He learned they were practicing for a talent show fundraiser for their school's music program. His report writing changed too. Where he once would have described suspicious individuals, he now wrote about local residents and community members. The shift in language reflected a deeper change in perspective. One evening, as Richardson was leaving the youth center, DJ approached him with an unexpected request. "Officer R, would you come to my game on Friday? It's the championship, and well, my mom has to work, so." Richardson felt something tighten in his throat. "I'd be honored, DJ. What time?" Friday night found Richardson in the high school gym, cheering as DJ's team battled for the city championship. He noticed other officers in attendance too. Some who'd been skeptical of his transformation had started showing up at the youth center, curious about the changes they'd seen in their colleague. During halftime, Coach P sat down beside him. "You know, when the chief first told me about this program, I thought it was just PR damage control. But watching you these past weeks, you've really shown up for these kids." Richardson watched as DJ gathered his team for a huddle. "They've shown up for me too. They've taught me more than any training course could." The game came down to the final seconds. DJ had the ball, his team down by 1 point. Richardson found himself on his feet, heart pounding as DJ drove to the basket. The shot went up, the buzzer sounded, and the gym erupted as the ball swished through the net. In the celebration that followed, Richardson saw something that stopped him in his tracks. DJ was hugging his mother. She'd managed to make it after all, still in her work uniform. When she saw Richardson, she walked over, tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. "DJ tells me everything you've done at the center. Everything you've taught him." Richardson shook his head. "He's taught me more than I could ever teach him." Later that night, as Richardson drove home, he passed the coffee shop where everything had changed. The lights were off now, but he could still picture that morning clearly, the anger, the prejudice, the confrontation that had set him on this path. His phone buzzed with a text from Chief Thompson, "Community meeting tomorrow. Would you share your experience with the other officers?" Richardson typed his reply without hesitation, "Yes. It's time to help others see what I was missing." The story of the racist cop and the coffee shop incident was becoming something larger than himself. It was becoming a blueprint for change, a testament to the possibility of transformation when someone was willing to do the hard work of confronting their own biases and choosing a different path. The community meeting was scheduled for Saturday morning at the local library's conference room. As Richardson prepared his presentation, he realized how far he'd come from that fateful morning at the coffee shop. The room filled quickly, not just with police officers, but with community members, youth center kids, and even some familiar faces from the cafe. Chief Thompson opened the session with a simple statement: "Real change happens when we're brave enough to share our stories, both the failures and the victories." Officer Richardson has something important to share with us today. Standing at the podium, Richardson took a deep breath. He saw DJ and some other youth center regulars sitting in the back row, giving him encouraging nods. The barista, Patel, had also come, sitting near the front with a supportive smile. 3 months ago, Richardson began, I was the kind of officer who saw threats instead of people. I didn't just have unconscious bias, I had conscious prejudice that I justified through selective enforcement and false assumptions. He shared everything: the coffee shop incident, the confrontation with Chief Thompson, the transformation at the youth center, and the countless small moments that had changed his perspective. As he spoke, he noticed some of his fellow officers shifting uncomfortably in their seats, perhaps recognizing their own behaviors in his story. The hardest part wasn't the training, he continued. It was looking in the mirror and admitting that I had become exactly what I'd sworn to fight against when I first put on this badge. I was supposed to protect and serve everyone, but instead, I was serving my own prejudices. During the question and answer session, a senior officer raised his hand. What about officer safety? We can't let our guard down on the streets. Richardson nodded thoughtfully. Being alert isn't the same as being prejudiced. Since I've started building real relationships in our community, I actually feel safer on patrol. When you know the people you're serving, when they trust you, they become your allies in keeping the peace. Coach P stood up next. Can you talk about the changes you've seen in our youth since this program began? Richardson smiled, glancing at DJ. They've taught me that every kid deserves a chance to be seen as a person first, not a potential problem. Our job isn't just to enforce laws, it's to help build a community where everyone feels protected, respected, and heard. After the meeting, several officers approached Richardson privately, asking about the youth center program. Chief Thompson watched from across the room, a satisfied expression on her face. Her experiment in rehabilitation over punishment was showing promising results. Later that afternoon, Richardson received an unexpected call. The local news wanted to do a feature story on the department's transformation. Chief Thompson left the decision up to him. Sometimes, she advised, sharing our mistakes publicly can help others avoid making them. The news segment aired the following week. It showed Richardson playing basketball at the youth center, serving coffee at the cafe, and working with other officers on community engagement initiatives. But more importantly, it showed the ripple effects of one person's change throughout an entire community. The story caught the attention of police departments in neighboring cities. Soon, Chief Thompson was fielding calls from other precincts interested in implementing similar programs. Richardson found himself sharing his experience with officers from across the state. One evening, as he was leaving the station, he ran into DJ's mother in the parking lot. She was there to file paperwork for a community advisory board that Chief Thompson had established. "You know," she said, "DJ's talking about becoming a police officer after college. He says he wants to be like you, not the old you, but the new you." Richardson felt the weight of those words. The new me is just trying to be who I should have been all along. The following week, during his regular shift at the youth center, Richardson noticed something different. A new group of officers had started dropping by during their breaks, playing quick games with the kids or just chatting. The barriers between law enforcement and the community were slowly breaking down. Chief Thompson's next initiative was a department-wide body camera review program. Officers would regularly review their own footage with peers, discussing ways to improve their interactions. Richardson's coffee shop incident became a teaching tool, a reminder that every interaction was an opportunity to either build or break community trust. During one review session, a rookie officer asked Richardson, "How do you know when you're doing it right? When you've really changed?" Richardson thought about the question carefully. When you stop seeing your badge as a shield that separates you from the community and start seeing it as a bridge that connects you to it. When you realize that every person you encounter deserves the same respect you'd want for your own family. The transformation of the department was gradual but undeniable. Complaint numbers dropped. Community participation in police programs increased. The coffee shop that had once been the scene of Richardson's lowest moment became a regular meeting spot for community police dialogue sessions. Patel, the barista, now greeted officers with genuine warmth, knowing they were there to connect, not intimidate. The cafe had become a symbol of what was possible when people chose growth over prejudice, understanding over fear. As Richardson drove home that evening, he passed the spot where he'd first met Chief Thompson. The autumn breeze that had carried whispers of change months ago had given way to the promise of spring, and with it, the continued hope of renewal and growth. Spring brought new challenges and opportunities to the department. Chief Thompson announced an expanded community policing initiative, using Richardson's transformation as a model for systematic change. The program would pair officers with local organizations, creating lasting partnerships beyond traditional law enforcement roles. One morning, Richardson arrived at the station to find an invitation on his desk. The State Police Academy wanted him to speak to their graduating class about community policing and personal transformation. As he read the letter, his hands trembled slightly. "Nervous about public speaking?" Chief Thompson asked, noticing his reaction. "Nervous about being seen as some kind of success story," Richardson replied honestly. "I'm still working on myself every day." "That's exactly why you're the right person to speak," she said. "Real change isn't about perfection, it's about progress." The Academy presentation was scheduled for the following week. As Richardson prepared, he spent time reflecting on his journey. He visited the coffee shop, now a bustling community hub, where Patel was training new staff. "Would you mind if I interviewed some of the regular customers?" he asked her. "I want to include their perspectives in my speech." Patel smiled warmly. "Of course. You know, we still tell new employees about that morning. But now we tell it as a story of hope." Over several days, Richardson collected stories from community members. Each account revealed a different facet of how police-community relationships had evolved. Mrs. Chen, the shopkeeper who had once filed a complaint against him, now served on the community advisory board. "Tell them," she said during their interview, "that trust is like a garden. It needs daily care to grow." The morning of the Academy presentation arrived crisp and clear. Richardson stood before 300 graduating cadets, their faces eager and uncertain. In the audience, he spotted Chief Thompson and several officers from his department, including some who had once been his harshest critics. "Your badge," he began, "will give you authority. But your actions will determine whether you earn respect. I learned this lesson the hard way." He shared the coffee shop story, but this time from multiple perspectives, his own, Chief Thompson's, the community's, and even his family's. He described how his daughter had recently told him she was proud to be a police officer's child, words he hadn't heard in years. "The hardest moment," he continued, "isn't when you're confronted with your mistakes. It's when you realize how many opportunities you missed to make a positive difference. Every interaction is a chance to either build or break trust." During the question and answer session, a cadet raised her hand. "How do you maintain professional distance while building community relationships?" "Professional distance doesn't mean emotional distance," Richardson explained. "It means making decisions based on law and justice, not bias or personal feelings. The strongest officers I know are the ones who can be both professional and compassionate." After the presentation, several instructors approached him about developing a regular training module based on his experience. The Academy director suggested incorporating ride-alongs with community leaders as part of cadet training. Back at the youth center that afternoon, Richardson found DJ helping younger kids with their homework. The teenager had started a peer mentoring program, using skills he'd learned from the police-youth partnership. "How'd your big speech go?" DJ asked, looking up from a math problem. "I told them about you," Richardson replied. "About how you taught me more about being a good officer than any training manual." DJ grinned. "Just wait until I'm your colleague. I got my college acceptance letter yesterday, criminal justice program." The news spread quickly through the center. Coach P organized an impromptu celebration, and Richardson watched as officers and kids alike congratulated DJ. The scene would have been unimaginable a year ago, police officers and teenagers sharing cake and laughter in genuine celebration. That evening, Chief Thompson called a special department meeting. She announced that their community policing program had been selected as a model for a statewide initiative. Departments across the state would send officers to learn from their experience. "This started with a cup of spilled coffee," she reminded them. "But it grew into something much bigger because one officer chose to change, and that change inspired others." As Richardson drove home that night, he passed familiar streets that now held new meanings. The basketball court where he'd learned humility. The coffee shop where he'd faced his prejudices. The community center where he'd discovered the true meaning of service. His phone buzzed with a message from his daughter. "Dad, my social studies teacher asked if you'd speak to our class about community policing." I told her you're kind of an expert now. Richardson smiled, remembering how far he'd come from that angry officer in the coffee shop. Each day still brought challenges, but now he faced them with a different perspective, one that saw opportunity in every interaction, hope in every connection, and possibility in every moment of service. The story of the racist cop and the coffee shop incident had evolved into something larger than himself. It had become a testament to the power of accountability, the possibility of redemption, and the importance of seeing humanity in every face, regardless of badge or background. The statewide initiative brought new responsibilities and challenges to the department. Other precincts began sending officers for week-long training sessions, and Richardson found himself increasingly in the role of mentor. Each visiting officer brought their own perspectives, biases, and resistance to change. One particularly challenging visitor was Officer Stevens from a rural precinct. During the first morning briefing, he made his skepticism clear. "This might work in your town, but where I'm from, we do things differently." Rather than argue, Richardson invited him to the youth center. "Come see for yourself," he suggested. No presentations, no lectures, just real community policing in action. That afternoon, they walked into the center during a busy homework session. DJ was helping a group of middle schoolers with their science projects while other teens played chess with two patrol officers. The atmosphere was relaxed, productive, and notably different from traditional police-youth interactions. "How do you maintain authority like this?" Stevens asked, watching an officer get checkmated by a 12-year-old. "Authority isn't the same as respect," Richardson explained. "These kids trust us because we've shown them we're here to support, not just supervise." As they observed, a commotion broke out between two teenagers near the basketball court. Before either officer could react, DJ and another youth mentor had already stepped in, defusing the situation through peer mediation techniques they'd learned through the program. Stevens watched in surprise. "In my precinct, that would have ended in handcuffs." "And how would that have helped anyone?" Richardson asked quietly. "Look at what just happened. These kids are learning conflict resolution, leadership, and community responsibility. That's more valuable than any arrest record." Throughout the week, Stevens' skepticism gradually gave way to curiosity. He joined basketball games, helped with homework, and even learned to make lattes during a community coffee morning. By Friday, he was taking notes on how to implement similar programs in his own precinct. Chief Thompson observed these transformations with satisfaction but remained focused on the bigger picture. During a department meeting, she announced the next phase of their initiative, a series of town halls where officers would listen to community members share their experiences with law enforcement. "This isn't about defending our actions," she emphasized. "It's about understanding their impact." The first town hall was held in the high school auditorium. Richardson sat on stage with other officers, listening as community members approached the microphone. Some stories were painful to hear, accounts of profiling, discrimination, and fear. Others offered hope, tales of positive changes they'd witnessed in recent months. An elderly gentleman stepped up to speak. Richardson recognized him as Mr. Washington, a regular at the coffee shop. "I've lived in this town for 60 years, he began. "Never thought I'd see the day when police officers would sit and listen to us like this. Real listening, not just waiting for their turn to speak." After the town hall, Richardson found Stevens standing alone, looking troubled. "How do you handle hearing all that?" the visiting officer asked. "Knowing you might have caused similar pain in your community?" "You acknowledge it," Richardson replied. "You apologize. And then you do the work to make sure it doesn't happen again." The following week brought a new development. DJ's college acceptance had inspired other teens at the youth center to consider careers in law enforcement. Chief Thompson proposed creating a cadet program specifically designed to recruit from within the community they served. Who better to protect and serve a neighborhood than those who grew up understanding its needs, she reasoned. Richardson took the lead in developing the program curriculum, incorporating lessons learned from his own journey. The focus wasn't just on law enforcement techniques but on emotional intelligence, cultural awareness, and community engagement. During a planning session, Coach P offered a valuable perspective. These kids need to see that becoming an officer doesn't mean leaving their community behind. They can be bridges between both worlds. The idea gained traction quickly. Local businesses, including the coffee shop, offered to sponsor uniforms and equipment for the cadet program. Community leaders volunteered as mentors, creating a support system that extended beyond the police department. One evening, as Richardson was leaving the youth center, he overheard a conversation between DJ and a younger teen. The boy was expressing doubts about joining the cadet program, worried about how his friends might react. "Let me tell you about Officer Richardson," DJ said. "He showed me that it's never too late to change, and it's never wrong to work toward making things better." Richardson waited until they finished talking before making his presence known. "You know, DJ, you might be a better teacher than I ever was." The boy smiled. "I learned from watching you learn, Officer R. That's what made it real." As spring turned to summer, the department's transformation continued to evolve. The coffee shop incident, once a source of shame, had become a cornerstone of their training program, a reminder that change begins with acknowledging our mistakes and choosing a different path forward. Richardson's phone buzzed with a text from Chief Thompson, State Police Commissioner visiting tomorrow. "Your youth center program is being considered for nationwide implementation." As he read the message, Richardson thought about how far they'd come from that autumn morning when a spilled cup of coffee had changed everything. The real measure of success wasn't in the programs they'd created or the recognition they'd received, but in the daily moments of connection that were slowly healing old wounds and building new bridges. The state police commissioner's visit brought an unexpected level of scrutiny to their small department. News vans lined the street outside the station, and reporters gathered in the parking lot, eager to document what had become known as the coffee shop transformation. Chief Thompson handled the media attention with characteristic grace, but insisted that the commissioner's tour begin not at the station, but at the coffee shop where everything had started. "To understand where we're going," she explained, "you need to see where we began." The commissioner, a veteran officer with 30 years of service, sat at a corner table while Patel shared her perspective on the changes she'd witnessed. The coffee shop had evolved into more than just a cafe, it had become a symbol of community transformation. "Now when officers come in," Patel explained, "they know everyone's names. They ask about our families. Last week, they even helped us organize a cultural food festival in the parking lot." Richardson, watching from nearby, remembered his own first cultural festival experience months earlier. He'd been nervous about trying unfamiliar foods, but the warmth of the community had made it feel like a family gathering rather than a formal event. The commissioner's next stop was the youth center, where DJ and his peers were leading a cadet training session. The teens had developed their own curriculum additions, incorporating real-world scenarios they'd experienced in their neighborhood. "What impresses me most," the commissioner commented, watching DJ demonstrate a de-escalation technique, "is how organic this feels. This isn't just a program, it's a genuine partnership." During lunch, served at a local community center, residents shared their stories of change. Mrs. Chen spoke about how officers now regularly checked on elderly shopkeepers, not to intimidate but to protect. Mr. Washington described the monthly community police dialogue sessions that had become standing-room-only events. The commissioner turned to Richardson. "Officer, what's the most important lesson you've learned through all this?" Richardson thought carefully before responding. "That true authority comes from trust, not fear. And trust isn't given with a badge, it's earned through consistent actions and genuine connections." Later that afternoon, the commissioner joined a regular patrol shift. Officers showed him how they'd modified their approach to routine calls, focusing on understanding situations before reacting to them. Even traffic stops had been transformed into opportunities for positive community interaction. Back at the station, the commissioner met with Chief Thompson privately. Through the office windows, Richardson could see them engaged in serious discussion, occasionally glancing at the community engagement statistics displayed on the wall. The day's final stop was a surprise to everyone. The commissioner wanted to attend the youth center's evening basketball league. The gym was packed with players, families, and officers, all cheering together regardless of which team scored. During a break in the game, DJ approached the commissioner. "Sir, can I share something with you?" The commissioner nodded, and DJ continued. "A year ago, I wouldn't have talked to any police officer. Now I'm planning to become one. That's because of officers like Richardson who showed us that change is possible, not just talking about it, but living it every day." The commissioner's formal report arrived 2 weeks later. The department's programs were not only approved for nationwide implementation but were being considered for a federal grant to support expansion. Chief Thompson called a department meeting to share the news. "This isn't just about recognition," she emphasized. "It's about responsibility. We're now going to be an example for departments across the country." The meeting room buzzed with excited discussion until Richardson raised his hand. "Chief, I have a suggestion." He proposed creating a mentorship program pairing veteran officers with community leaders. "We need to ensure this transformation outlasts any individual officer or chief," he explained. "It needs to become part of our department's DNA." The suggestion sparked an hour-long brainstorming session. Officers who had initially resisted change were now proposing innovative ways to deepen community connections. The coffee shop incident had evolved from a cautionary tale into a catalyst for continuous improvement. That evening, as Richardson completed his patrol paperwork, he received an unexpected visitor. Officer Stevens had returned from his rural precinct, this time with his chief and several colleagues. "We've started implementing some of your programs," Stevens shared. "It hasn't been easy, but last week, something amazing happened. A group of teens who used to run from us actually asked for our help in organizing a community sports league." Richardson smiled, remembering his own early doubts. "The hardest part is taking that first step, admitting that change is necessary." As summer progressed, the department's transformation continued to evolve. The cadet program expanded, community partnerships deepened, and new officers arrived regularly for training. But perhaps most significantly, the culture of the department had fundamentally shifted. Officers no longer measured success solely by arrest statistics or citation numbers. Instead, they tracked community engagement, positive interactions, and the growing number of youth interested in law enforcement careers. One afternoon, Richardson found himself back at the coffee shop, sitting at the same counter where he'd once spilled his drink in anger. Patel served him his usual order, now made exactly how he liked it. "You know," she said, "we're thinking of renaming the shop Community Grounds, because this place has become where the community and police find common ground." Richardson looked around at the mix of officers and residents sharing tables, conversations, and laughter. The angry officer who had walked through these doors months ago would never have imagined such a scene. His phone buzzed with a message from DJ, "Got my first college criminal justice assignment. Topic: The future of community policing. Mind if I interview you?" As Richardson typed his reply, he realized that the story of the racist cop and the coffee shop incident hadn't ended. It had merely begun a new chapter in a much larger narrative about community, change, and the possibility of transformation. 1 year had passed since that fateful morning at the coffee shop. The department was preparing for a special ceremony marking both Chief Thompson's first anniversary and the official launch of their nationwide community policing initiative. The event was to be held in the town square, a location that held different memories for different people. For Richardson, it had once been a place of confrontation, where he'd viewed every gathering with suspicion. Now, it was where the community gathered for monthly festivals, youth performances, and police community partnership celebrations. As Richardson helped set up chairs for the ceremony, he noticed DJ directing a group of cadet program participants. The young man had just completed his first year of college, maintaining straight A's while mentoring new recruits in the program he'd helped build. "Everything ready for your speech?" Richardson asked him. DJ nodded, adjusting his tie nervously. "Never thought I'd be speaking at something like this. My mom's taking the whole day off to be here." The square filled quickly as the ceremony time approached. Police officers mingled with community members, their interactions natural and friendly. Mrs. Chen had closed her shop early to attend, bringing homemade treats for everyone. Patel and her coffee shop staff had set up a refreshment station, serving their newly created community blend coffee. Chief Thompson took the podium first, her presence commanding yet approachable. "1 year ago," she began, "a cup of spilled coffee sparked a transformation that none of us could have predicted. But the real change wasn't in our programs or policies, it was in our hearts and minds." She went on to announce the department's latest statistics: complaints down by 85%, community participation up by 200%, and a waiting list for the cadet program. But more importantly, she spoke about the immeasurable changes, the trust rebuilt, the relationships formed, the barriers broken down. When it was Richardson's turn to speak, he looked out at the gathered crowd. He saw Officer Stevens and representatives from other departments who had come to learn from their experience. He saw his daughter sitting proudly with his wife, no longer embarrassed to be a police officer's child. "A year ago, I was the problem," he began honestly. "I was what needed to change. Standing here today, I'm reminded that transformation isn't a destination, it's a continuous journey." He shared stories from the past year: midnight basketball games at the youth center, community dinners where officers and residents broke bread together, graduation ceremonies for the first class of cadets. Each story illustrated not just what had changed, but why it mattered. DJ's speech followed, moving many to tears as he described his journey from fearing police to becoming a future officer himself. "Officer Richardson taught me that change is possible," he said. "But this community taught me that change is powerful when we do it together." The ceremony concluded with the unveiling of a new monument in the square, a simple plaque that read, "Where coffee spilled, community grew." Dedicated to all who choose transformation over tradition, understanding over assumption, and hope over fear. After the ceremony, as people mingled and shared refreshments, Richardson found himself back at the coffee shop's refreshment station. Patel handed him a cup of the community blend. "Try it," she said with a smile. "We created it to be perfectly balanced, like the relationship between police and community should be." Chief Thompson joined them, accepting her own cup. "You know," she mused, "when I took this job, some people thought I was crazy to believe one department could change the narrative around police-community relations. Were they right?" Richardson asked. She gestured at the scene before them: officers playing with children, teenagers chatting comfortably with patrol officers, community leaders and police supervisors discussing future initiatives. "Look around," she said. "We didn't just change a narrative. We created a new one." As the sun began to set, Richardson took a final walk around the square. He passed the basketball court where he'd learned his first humbling lessons, the community center where barriers had slowly broken down, and finally, the coffee shop where everything had begun. His phone buzzed with a message from his daughter. "Dad, my friend's police officer parent asked me how our department did it. I told her to start with a cup of coffee and an open heart." The message reminded him that change wasn't just about big moments or official programs, it was about the small daily choices to see people as people, to listen more than speak, to serve rather than supervise. The next morning, Richardson arrived early for his shift. As he walked into the station, he saw new officers going through their orientation. Chief Thompson had made their training program a model for departments nationwide, focusing on community engagement from day one. A young recruit stopped him in the hallway. "Officer Richardson?" We learned about your story in training. Could you tell us, was it hard to change? Richardson thought about the question carefully. The hardest part wasn't changing, he replied. It was admitting that change was necessary. But once you make that choice, every step forward, no matter how small, takes you closer to being the officer your community deserves. As he headed out for patrol, Richardson passed the coffee shop. Through the window, he could see officers and residents sharing tables, conversations, and laughter. The angry man who had once spilled coffee in prejudiced rage was gone, replaced by someone who understood that true strength came not from authority, but from connection. The story of the racist cop and the coffee shop incident had become more than a cautionary tale or a success story. It had become a blueprint for possibility, a reminder that transformation was always possible for those willing to begin with a single step, or in this case, a single cup of coffee. As Richardson started his patrol, he smiled at the new plaque in the town square, knowing that the real monument wasn't in bronze or stone, but in the changed hearts and minds of a community that had learned to see each other as people first, and everything else second.